Ladies and gentlemen, Youth Athletics Podcast. I'm your co-host, Mr. Ed Sullivan, also known as Sully, and I'm joined by
Mr. Dan Murphy, otherwise known as Murph.
Mr. Stan Murphy is his alternate Netflix account username. That allows him to get multiple accounts going. Well, Murph, we got a special episode tonight.
Yeah.
The progression of youth sports athletes to high school, college, and beyond.
Yes. And
we got some special guests. We have Matt Burns, who is a former alum of the school that we used to, well, not that we used to. He used to attend the school that we coach at. He's a former collegiate athlete. We have Sophie Sullivan and Brendan Yarusso, who are current varsity high school athletes in the area. So welcome, guys, to the show. We're glad to have you.
Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so we're going to start off here with Brendan. Brendan, what high school sports do you play?
I play soccer and basketball at St. Francis.
Okay.
Excellent. Sophie, how about you?
I play basketball at Montini.
Very good. Brendan, how long are your practices for your basketball practices in high school?
My practices are about 2 hours long, and about 3 times a week we go up to the weight room and lift for about half an hour.
Okay.
Sophie, how about you?
I think practices range in time. They can go from like 2 to 3 hours, depending on if we need to go watch film, and that's about 6 days a week.
Wow. How much time is spent watching film for each of you guys?
It depends, like how big like the game is the next day, but it could go up to an hour.
Okay. Yeah, we have a scouting report on each team that we have. It's about 15 minutes long, and then they want you to watch the latest game that we just played.
Okay.
How many days a week do you guys have practice?
Every day.
Every day?
Yeah.
Including Sunday, the Lord's Day?
Not Sunday.
Okay. had to throw that out there. Sophie, how about you?
Same thing, 6 days a week, and then we take Sunday as our off day.
Okay.
Yep. And, for those that are in grade school sports right now, you're lucky to get 2, maybe 3 practices a week for an hour and 15, depending on how awesome your athletic director is.
And how pushy your coach is.
How pushy your coach is, right? I mean, if I could win the lottery today, I'd build a 6-court facility tomorrow, but yeah. I have not won the lottery yet. So, we carry on. Murph, I'll let you ask the next question to the crew.
Actually, I got so one thing I want to ask about the weight training. So, Brendan, playing 2 sports, is it different? The weight training you guys do, and Sophie, if you could talk a little bit about the basketball side of things too.
Soccer, we don't really do much weight training. It's more conditioning.
Okay.
Basketball is where we lift a lot more, bench, deadlift.
Okay. I figured that, but I wanted to ask. How about you, Soph?
We don't lift at all as a team. We all do like individual training on our own. So we're not like taught at Montini like what lifting stuff to do. It's basically like you do what you think you need to do. You go to whatever training you need to. But we have like preseason workouts where like we can go up and do like ab workouts and lift if you know how to do it.
Okay. Sully, is it okay if I ask Matt a question about that? Because
absolutely.
Yeah. So Matt, tell us what your weight training consists of, and it's interesting. It's kind of actually surprising to hear that, and maybe it's just basketball or whatever. But I would think that certain sports would have not only weight training, but would have it be fairly structured, and certain things they want you to do, certain things they don't want you to do. Talk about that if you can.
Yeah. So I mean, it really depends on all the sport. Generally, I competed in football, basketball, and track and field. And pretty much all 3 of those were, like Brennan said earlier, 3 days a week. Sometimes it really depended. My school, we were lucky enough to where you would get your varsity athletics weight training done in your PE class. It was a specific class called individual fitness and training. Some sports do in the morning, some sports do in the afternoon. It really depends. But there's a great variability between sport. I mean, in track and field, for instance, the lifts that the sprinters are doing and the distance guys are, the sprinters and the throwers are doing are entirely different. But yeah, it's pretty structured. In high school, still even to a point where, you lift in certain groups. Like for football, for instance, you might lift in a specific group of 4. A lot of times all your weights are going to be not necessarily always documented, but, what your reps are, what your personal best is. And certain coaches, depends on who you have, might take a specific interest in, making sure you're trying to PR not only do your best, not only on the court, but also in the weight room, like maybe best your personal lift by 10 pounds or 5 pounds from one week to the next. So they take a little bit closer track to it, which is good.
Cool. So Soph and Brendan, how about intensity of practices? Let's talk a little bit about that from grade school to high school.
Well, I had my dad as a coach, and he was pretty intense.
He is?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Ask Eddie Devins.
I like that. That's good.
But we have one coach who played in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
So he's very intense. Like if you don't do the littlest detail right, you have to restart the whole thing.
Okay. How about you, Soph?
I went to Sacred Heart for like most of my grade school athletic experience, and like we had like 3 girls that did travel basketball. So those practices were always intense because we played in the same AAU team together, so we were always pushing each other.
Mm-hmm.
But when I went to high school, it was obviously a dramatic jump because you're trying to win state championships and get scholarships. So I think the intensity level definitely changed based on those things.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So Brendan, how was your interactions with how does game preparation vary from grade school to the high school level? Like, how does it differ preparing for games, whether it's individually or as a team?
Individually, it's kind of the same. As a team, we have huddle that we use to watch film. So we'll scout the other team and go over. We have more game plans that we want to focus on, and we know their best players.
Sounds good. Sophie, how about you? How's it changed as an individual and, as a team as a whole preparing for a game?
Well, individually and as a team, you have to know all the plays because in grade school, there's not many plays you have to learn. You kind of just have to play the game and try and win. But in high school, there's lots of like schemes, and you need to be able to execute everything in order to win the game. So.
Okay. So let's talk about the length of the basketball season, the number of games, all that kind of stuff. You guys, maybe we'll start with Sophie. The length of the season and preseason as well, the training you do before and all that kind of stuff, and talk about that.
Well, season goes from November to somewhere in March or like late February, depending on like where you like go in playoffs. But season isn't just like in between those months because we have June ball, which is about 15 to 20 games in June you could play, depending on like if you're playing JV or varsity or both. And then July is for AAU, but then we have like fall league and we play games there. I don't remember what months they were, but and then we always have like training sessions in between that. So it's definitely not just from November to February, but.
Hey, Sophie, not to cut you off, we have a comment here from Chief Steve Riley.
Oh, my gosh.
Sophie is very dark and hard to see. They want to see your pretty face, Sophie.
Light on.
I was going to say the same thing, Soph, but yeah, I'm on your mojo.
Shout out to the Chief for always being a loyal listener. And never mind that.
Little candle in the background or something.
I was going to say there we go. For anyone that's viewing the show live, if you comment on Facebook or YouTube, it gives us the opportunity to post your comment if you have a comment for either Murph or myself or for anyone on the panel. And Steve Riley says that I love Sophie, and who doesn't, right?
That's right.
So thank you, Steve. Brendan, we'll kick it to you now to answer that question.
Ours is about November to March. We have a league in June that we have We have the whole month of June to do stuff. So I think last summer, we had about 35 games in the month of June, and then practice Monday through Thursday.
Wow. What about the?
I know.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sully.
I was going to say, I know from my experiences as a football player back in the day, it seemed like there really was no break from football, right? Everything you were doing throughout the year, I'm sure it's the way for any other sport. Everything that you do, whether it's in PE class or it's on your own or it's with the team, there's targeted stuff that you're always preparing for the next season.
Yeah. What about you guys brought up AAU and we one of the podcasts we have and will actually talk a little bit about travel and all that kind of stuff. Can actually each of the three of you talk a little bit about the travel ball, I'll call it just generally, and your experiences with that? Are the coaches watching? Are they even more focused on that? That kind of thing. And it probably varies a little bit by sport too, but just whoever, maybe Matt, we'll start with you since we don't want you to fall asleep.
Yeah, right. So like I said, I participated in basketball. I actually only played 2 years of high school basketball. I stopped after my sophomore year, so I did not personally play travel ball, but I will speak my sophomore year. I had 11, 12 teammates. Probably half of them were playing travel ball. And, some coaches will suggest it and others won't. Or I shouldn't say suggest. Some coaches will really push you to do it and others will just kind of like it's on you. It seems like the kids that don't play travel basketball are generally ones who are multi-sport athletes. They might have football to worry about, like Ed mentioned, or they're playing baseball. So a lot of times you see kids that are playing travel ball. Really, that's their only sport, and the big sports for that is obviously basketball and baseball. So,
okay, Brendan.
I just recently started travel basketball, so I started in about 8th grade, freshman year.
Okay.
And I haven't played for many top tier travel teams, but I've played a year above to try and get the best competition.
Mm-hmm.
So the coaches, I would say some of them are a little more intense because that's almost the only time they coach. So they don't coach during the winter season, and they're trying to get a high school job at the same time.
All right. Huh. That's interesting. So what do you think? What do you think does that change their coaching style, you think, on some level?
A little bit, because they'll yell at you a little more.
Yep.
But I think that's really it. But I think my practices are more scrimmaging. There wasn't many plays that we had to do.
Okay.
Just play.
Yeah. Okay. How about you, Soph? You played a lot of years of it, right?
Yeah, I started AAU end of 3rd grade, and I still play, obviously, but there is a difference between AAU and high school basketball, because high school there's a lot more plays and stuff like that, but in AAU it's more you're free to play and try new things that you need to work on. So that's the difference between AAU and high school, and AAU's been a fun experience to meet new people and travel to different places while playing basketball. So.
Do you think both did they help each other in a sense, like the set aspect of it and the plays versus the kind of if you will, maybe more run and gun and that kind of thing, but you obviously have to make decisions faster and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I got to play up in 17U last summer, and that was a fun experience. And you could tell the speed of the game and the strength of these players that are going to these top D1 schools. You can really see a difference from playing at your own age level, like Brendan said.
Yeah.
And it's always good to push yourself.
Very cool.
Bernsey, I got a question for you. Something that probably wasn't around when you were a high school athlete. And for those that don't know, Matt is a former 400-meter dash state champion for the IHSA. Something that's really started to develop now, Matt. Would you have been interested back in the day they have AAU track clubs now for kids that are in?
Yeah, there was a couple when I was coming up. There was a group based at DuPage Track Club, but it was pretty much exclusively one certain area. There was a couple there. They weren't super prominent, but I was pretty busy with football and basketball. Would have been very interested into it, but by the time I just got down to one sport, just running track. I was a senior in high school, so I definitely would be interested in it. And I don't really know how much about how it works because, like you said, I graduated in 2014, 6 years ago from high school. So I liked being kept busy, you know, trying to do as many sports as I could until it got to the point where I knew what I was doing in college, and then kind of focused on that. But, you know, if it was more prominent, then it was more around, there's more options, I probably would have, you know, taken up on it. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I know our brother Ben, Sophie and I, our brother Ben, he coaches that now. And, you know, we have some former athletes. I know Michael Wangler. I'm not sure if you know who that is, Matt, but I know he is as invested into track as I've seen someone in a long time. I mean, that kid eats, breathes, sleeps track and field. So
yeah, good.
Yeah, it's good. You'd be happy. You'd be happy about that.
Yeah.
So our next question for Brendan and Sophie, we'll start with Sophie. Sophie, what academic eligibility standards do you have to uphold as a varsity student athlete?
So, see, I don't really know exactly because I've never been put in this situation, but if you're failing 2 classes starting like at the beginning of the week, you're out for the rest of the week. Even if like Tuesday you got your grade up, you're out for that whole week until the next like starting period. So you can't be failing 2 classes at once, or else you're not eligible for your sport that week.
Brendan, is yours similar at your high school?
I think it's very similar.
Yeah.
Yep. And, you know, most grade schools, most middle schools kind of have a philosophy that kids shouldn't, you know, every place is different, but most of the schools in this area have, you know, even the school Murph and I, you know, and Matt coach at, we don't have a true eligibility policy. I mean, obviously if a student's, you know, not getting their work done or struggling, we'll provide them with extra support. But, you know, in high school, they really ramp it up. So for those grade school athletes watching this, you know, the academic standard, the bar is raised. So you got to be ready for that.
Yeah. I found when I was an athlete 112, 113 years ago that it was actually easier to get good grades when you were so busy, you know, because you were playing multiple sports and you just didn't have enough time. You didn't have any time in the day to waste anyway. So you might as well be, you know, pushing the same intensity level, if you will. Is that you guys feel that way? It's actually easier to handle that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely can't speak, you know, I can't pull up the sources, but there's like actual studies out there, I think, that say, you know, kids that are participating in sports usually succeed in school a little bit more because, like you said, they're already on such a strict schedule. You know they got to do homework at a certain time every night. They know they got to study at a certain time every night. And one thing I will say about the eligibility with high school is I even had coaches that went beyond, you know, the IHSA regulations where you need to have X amount of, you know, classes you're passing or GPA or whatnot. And they would just make their own decision saying if you're eligible or not based on your grades. So they really took a really, really big initiative and cared about your grades. And they got the okay from, you know, the AD and the principal to maybe say, hey, we're going to have a little bit more on this team. We're going to have a little bit more strict of, you know, eligibility standards for grades and stuff. So,
yeah. Cool.
So Murph, I'll let you ask the last question to Sophie and Brendan before we transition into the college athlete questions for Matt.
All right. Let's talk about the difference between kind of coaches' interaction itself in grade school versus high school. I'm sure it's pretty different on a lot of levels, but you guys to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, in grade school, our coaches were a lot of parents. Mm-hmm. So you knew their kids, so you knew their parents a little bit more. In high school, you meet a new coach and you're trying to create a relationship a little bit. Mm-hmm. So you don't know them as well. So it's kind of, I wouldn't say awkward at first, but it starts off quiet, but then you have to just gain the relationship and trust in each other.
Yeah. How about you, Soph?
I agree with Brendan. It's definitely more.
Okay.
Okay, I won't. You're definitely trying to like build your relationship more with like your coach in high school because you're going to be with them for 4 years, and I don't know, honestly, but you definitely, I think you create more of a bond in high school because the closer you get with your team and your coach, the closer you will get to like winning championships if that's your goal, if you take your sport that seriously.
Mhm.
And I think building a relationship with those people, like your coach and teammates, is the most important thing about sports in high school.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think Murph, just the time commitment alone, when you're spending 6 days a week with someone, you're gonna get closer to them than someone that you only spend 2.5, 3 hours with each week. I mean, I think that's just, and the emotions of a high school game are so much more intense than a grade school game, unless you're, throwing a fit on the sideline. Just kidding.
Oh, like that doesn't apply to you? Come on now.
I've never thrown a fit. I'm very loud, but I don't throw fits.
Well, yeah, all right.
Unless it's with
Fit
Steve.
generally defined, we're emotional coaches, Sully. We know that. Come on now.
So Sophie and Brendan, overly emotional. Sophie and Brendan, do you have anything, and Matt, to add on we'll start with Matt, the ultimate difference between grade school and high school sports?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference I experienced, it's been, when I started high school sports was 10 years ago, but biggest thing I saw was just kind of the camaraderie and the team culture. Like you mentioned, you're with your team so much more. You're traveling with them a little bit more. You're practicing 6 days a week. You really kind of grow close to that, like family, or some people, when you hear the word family thrown out with sports. So I think you just really grow a lot closer to your teammates, and obviously the relationships with the coach, like Brendan and Sophie said, are a little bit different. You might have some out of practice communication and stuff like that, and doing a little bit more, but really the team aspect, it really grows camaraderie.
Brendan, how about you?
Well, the kids are a little bigger and faster, so and the competition is a lot better, because when I first started varsity this year, and last year I played sophomore, I was getting pushed around all the time. Like, it was not fun. So weight room is very important to build up your body, but you get pushed around way more, because in grade school I was one of the bigger kids. Now I'm one of the smaller kids. So it's physically demanding on your body.
And Brendan, I know I haven't been able to get to any of your games, and I want to, but in talking with your dad, I know that you have a specific job every night that you step on the court, and you're tasked with stopping the other team's best offensive player. What type of mentality do you go into with a game? Because let's be honest, when you're given that task, there's a certain mindset you have to have when it comes to shutting someone down.
I just think they're not scoring on me. I attack them more than try and defend them. So, like, I'll get up into them, not really let them have space to do what they want to do. So I try and make it as much as uncomfortable for them as I can.
Very good. Sophie?
I think the main difference between like youth sports and like high school sports is the intensity levels, because some people in grade school only play for fun, which is like totally fine. And then there's others who like want to compete at higher levels in like high school and college. So the intensity in high school is it's a like big difference depending on what level you play on. And I think the commitment is also a huge difference between grade school and high school, because in grade school you could miss those practices and like it's really not if you're in high school and you miss practices, you're going to be benched. But in grade school, it's not necessarily like that. So there's more of a commitment situation with that, in my opinion.
No, you're right. I mean, Murph and I, we could speak to it. A lot of times our teams have small team sizes, and a lot of times kids are doing multiple things. And, if we don't have the kids, we don't have a team. So we tend to be, a little more flexible definitely more flexible than at the high school level. Because when, you're in high school, you are essentially, you're in a relationship with your sport, right? Like you're there. So,
right. I would think that would change how you guys interact with teammates too, is if somebody's kind of, if you will, not pulling their weight, you can, whereas in grade school, you probably don't have the ability to do that for the reasons that Sully just mentioned. But in high school, I would think, in college, of course, as well, that you guys would have the ability, freedom, and actually feel the urge to, if there's a teammate that's not stepping up in some way, that you feel like you can call them out. So I'm curious, what do you guys, any thoughts on that? Sorry. Let's start with Sophie. So you guys are.
I mean, at least with us, we barely have anyone who misses practices because we're just all really serious about the game. But the only way we really miss practices is if we're like sick. So we don't really have issues with that with our team because everyone's always at practice. But I don't know with like other team situations.
Okay. Brandon, what about you?
We have a D1 volleyball player on our team. So he misses a lot for volleyball, but we know that he's missing. So we went ahead into the season knowing he's gonna miss a bunch of games. So we kind of put that behind us and just want him there as much as we can.
Does that change what you can do on the court to some extent? How the coach coaches and how you guys, can play when he's there and maybe have to change when he's not?
Yeah, it helps. He's about 6'8", so he's our big tall kid in the middle.
Can't teach height.
Yeah.
You cannot.
Very cool. How about you, Matt? And maybe
I think
high school and college.
Yeah, college especially. If you see guys, I mean, there's no, you definitely can't miss practice, and if you do, you're going to hear about it, or probably be dismissed. But in high school, especially, I think it's totally acceptable to start taking some accountability, and holding other people accountable and saying, hey, the team needs you, we need you. You saw a little bit of that, not as much with missing practice, but maybe effort level in practice, or if kids aren't taking it as seriously as they should be. You have the natural captains that might step up and say, hey, come on, man, you got to shape up, or hey, you got to make sure we're working hard, or make sure we're doing this, or make sure we're showing up. So I think, in high school it starts, and then college it really takes over to where guys are taking accountability and they're holding others accountable as well.
That different for the different sports too?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, because I mean, it gets to a point. Track's really weird because when you're training, you're physically running, and there does get to a point where athletes break, and that breaking point is different for everyone. And there's really no way to certainly tell if someone is, saying they're done and they really are done. And so that would get to a point I've noticed a lot of times in college, still happen in high school, where a guy, we're doing 12 reps of a workout, and the coach knows that not everyone's going to get through 12 because everyone's at a different level. And some guy, throws in the towel at 9, but his teammates know, okay, this, you can do a 10th. We know you, we run with you every day. And they might call him out and say, hey, come on, man, like, one more rep, you got it. And, that even happened in high school. So with track, especially, it was big. Football and basketball, not as much, because people are, you can't not give effort in those sports. It would show, so easily, so clearly. So, but yeah, people will call each other out for stuff like that. Not call each other out, but encourage each other to do better.
Yeah.
Very good. So we're going to transition now to the college side of things. Once again, for those of you watching on Facebook or YouTube, if you have any questions, you can hit the comments, and we will be able to share some of those comments if they apply to the subject. But Matt, can you tell us how many years were you a college athlete? Where did you attend, and what sport did you participate in?
Yeah, I was lucky enough. I competed in all 4 years. I was a sprinter for the University of Illinois.
Excellent. Go Illini, ILL.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
And was the 400?
Yeah, 400 meters. One thing, I mean, when I was in high school, I jumped and I ran. In high school, I'd maybe run anywhere from the 100. Sometimes I'd run a 4x8 or something like that. So a little more range, would high jump and long jump if we kind of needed it in a meet, if we were having, didn't have enough guys to fill all the events. But once I got to college, it really got specialized. Really only ran the 400 and primarily the 4x4, the relay, because I was lucky enough we had a lot of real quick guys on our team. We put together some good relay teams, so I focused on that a lot more than even the individual 400.
Okay. What about I would think that for some, like we were talking about Michael before and saying how he's very dedicated to it, and I think especially when you're a great track star or whatever you are in high school, and you have multiple abilities, if you will.
Right.
Teams asking you to step up. How is that transitioning to just one event? I've got to think that's got to be a little bit of a, if you will, a letdown at first, and then maybe the specialization kicks in. But tell me about that.
Yeah, so it's obviously tough. I want to, you want to be as versatile as you can, but at the end of the day, it's all about helping the team score, helping the team succeed. So if that means you're doing one event and that's the only event you do, that's just kind of how it's going to be when you get to college. There are still people who do multiple events, or someone who might jump and run simultaneously, but then you also have like the multi-events where people are doing decathlons. The women do heptathlon, pentathlon, but yeah, it can be a little bit of a letdown, but at the end of the day, you're just helping the team. If you can specialize in one thing, you're obviously going to be producing better in that one rather than, putting your eggs in all different types of baskets. So at the end of the day, it's just to help the team out.
Okay. Well, Big Ten, obviously that's a big deal. Is it, how would you describe that experience, being in that kind of environment and maybe the shock, if you will, of going from high school level, as intense as that was, to college?
Right. Yeah. So in high school, every kid that's running in the Big Ten is, when they're in high school, they're that guy. They're winning the races, they're winning their events. But then you get to college, and it's just filled with all really, really just super, super good athletes. And track is really unique, in which truly a lot of times college, since there really isn't a professional, there is a professional track and field circuit, but it doesn't pay like other sports do. It's more so a hobby rather than, a career. And so with that being said, a lot of times some of the best athletes in the world in track and field are in college and in those big conferences like the Big Ten or the SEC. So, we would be in meets in which, for that year, the world number one time would be posted at the meet that we're competing at, another college kid amongst us. And he just ran the fastest time in the world for that calendar year. So it really is, it's a big shock, but it's also, like, it drives you to be better because, the competition is just so good, especially at that high level.
Yeah. Very cool.
So, Matt, one of the questions that I have for you, and I always say this to my athletes, the phrase is student athlete, not athlete student. So student does come first. When you're a college athlete, what supports did the University of Illinois provide for you from a student perspective?
Right. I can't speak on behalf of all universities because it really is different with the funding of the school. It depends on where you go. But for us, example, we had endless amounts of resources. There wasn't really much of an excuse to not succeed in the classroom, and they really do care. Some examples, the DIA, the Department of Intercollegiate Athletics at U of I, we had a sponsored tutoring system. So if you're struggling in a class, you could schedule a tutor for free for any class the university has to offer. You can go once a week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week if you really need it. The one thing I will say is they're really strict about it. If you blow off a tutor or you show up late, you're being disrespectful, there's huge repercussions. So the tutoring service was awesome. Other academic opportunities, obviously gaining a scholarship, that's nice. But as far as the scholarship goes, your books get paid for. They really do take an interest in your academics. And I can even speak on behalf of the fact that you really couldn't, parents out there, you don't have to worry about your kids skipping class, because where I was at, student athletes, the department hired checkers, and these people would come and they knew what student athletes were supposed to be in what lecture halls at what time, and they'd show up and make sure you're there. And that was their job. They just run around the campus, checking classes, make sure kids are in class. And if they weren't, it gets reported to your coaches. There's recurring problems. It get reported to the athletic director. We had state-of-the-art academic facilities that were exclusively used just for the athletes. And you have study tables, like starting your freshman year, you got to log X amount of hours a week. I think it was like 15 hours a week. You have to be in that specific center. And they have employees walking around the rooms and the labs, making sure you're actually working and you're not just goofing off watching Netflix on the TV. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot. And like I said, there's no excuse really not to succeed because they set you up for it. And, when you're getting free tutors and whatnot, you really should take advantage of that. So.
Well, that's good to hear that they provide that support. I know I had friends that were student athletes in college, and, if you think that the bar of academic standard for grade school to high school is a big jump, the jump from high school to college is even bigger, because ultimately they're trying to get you ready for life after sports.
Yeah, exactly. There's even stuff like they want you got to have your academic schedule set up. I mean, it sounds like preferential treatment, but you get priority registration over all the other students in the school because your academic schedule has to fit around when your team is scheduled to practice. So even something like that, it doesn't sound like much, but being able to register before 40,000 other students, some schools even bigger, 80,000 other students, it's huge because you get to mold your schedule exactly how you like it, which is nice, but it's for the purpose of, making sure your practices are in line and everything. So,
yeah, that's actually really good to hear, from being around a lot of athletes as well in college and things like that, and seeing them in class for me was always like, because we heard, before some of the academic standards were put in place to some extent, that wasn't emphasized, and I think still isn't emphasized to some extent, but obviously that's really good to hear. What do you think is the toughest part about the being a college athlete overall?
Yeah, the most difficult part probably is, just balancing everything. I've had people tell me this is not true by any means, but people have said, in college, as an athlete, you got, your social life, you have academic success and athletic success. You can pick two of them. And that's obviously not the case, but it really is a juggling act. You got to make sure, you make time for yourself to have some fun or, relax, read a book, go outside, do something with your friends, make sure your mental health is right. But then you also have to find time to really, study. I mean, you're practicing, at least once a day. A lot of sports practice 2 or 3 times a day, 6 days a week. You get one day off, and then you got to get yourself to class. You got to even, find time to feed yourself. It's really not as there's 24 hours in a day, and the time of the day just seems to just like hours just go. So really just balancing everything,
yeah,
probably the hardest.
On the flip side, Matt, what's the most rewarding part about being a collegiate athlete?
The most rewarding, I don't know. I would have to say you just, the amount of work you're putting in, and it's not always about what you're doing. Others, aren't physically able to. It's what you're doing others aren't willing to do, because it's so much time. You have to invest so much time into it. The NCAA will put in place, you're allowed to practice 20 hours a week when you're in season. But I'll tell you from experience that a lot of schools and a lot of sports, I'd say most all schools and most all sports kind of struggle to adhere to that. You might be practicing 30 hours a week, and to be able to say, hey, you know what, I got these good grades, or, I was successful in school, but I did that while I was putting this work in here. It really it makes graduating from college even more of I shouldn't say graduating from college, because not everyone might graduate, but succeeding in college, going through college, more rewarding.
And probably prepares you better for after college, because some kids, of course, present company excluded, Sully, you and I, go to college, and there's a lot of time for most people, not for athletes, but for most people, there is a lot of time. So do you feel like you were better prepared than a lot of your friends that maybe weren't competing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, from whether you're furthering your education or you're going into the workforce, just being able to say, hey, I was a college athlete, and like I mentioned earlier, I juggled all these things simultaneously. And I still had, this is still what my resume looks like. It just shows that you have maybe a little bit of a higher tolerance to stress, because, there's a lot of stressors going on. You're able to really hunker down and do maybe 2 or 3 tasks at once. You can multitask. But yeah, it just really speaks to, volumes to your character. If you're able, if someone tells me they're a college athlete, I'm like, oh, at least I know, they can handle 3 or 4 things at once and not be overtaken by it. So,
okay.
So we got a question for you, Matt, we mentioned him earlier in the show. Michael Wengler would like to know, Matt, do you have any advice for high school track athletes, and what did you do to get to Division I?
Well, what I did, luckily I was just given a lot of God-given talent. I mean, there gets to be a point where there's only so much work you can do. So I was pretty lucky with that. But with that being said, there's always kind of an athletic continuum, and at some point the talent that you're given will run out, and we're kind of all already have a predetermined how fast we are or whatever. But there is a work component to it, and there's going to be a guy next to you that you're lining up with every meter, your teammates. And I think a big thing is, you just got to have the mentality that you're going to outwork them, every single day, whether that's not just the running reps, it's the little things, it's stretching, it's It's working out. I mean, if you have an injury, being really, really diligent about, making sure you're recovering from that injury. If you're in high school, it depends on where you're at, getting in the training room. Every single thing you do has got to be, 100% if you want to get to a really high level. Because at some point in time, there's going to be someone who's better than you, because there's always someone that's better than you. And really the only way to make up for that deficit is just outwork them. So, you just got to have a workman's mentality and really just put it 100% effort out at all times.
What about specialization as far as,
with sport or event?
With event maybe, and I think it's probably sport is a good commentary too, but just event wise specifically, in high school for say Michael or others. Yeah.
So I think that, Michael, if you're looking to get to the Division I level, I think a lot of coaches do look at if you're a versatile athlete, because obviously in a track and field meet, if you only run the 400 meters, like I did myself when I got to college, you can only score them 10 points. If you can do, a couple events, say you can long jump, you can run the 400, you can, turn in a leg in the 4x1, your potential for scoring, obviously raises greatly. So being versatile, which I know you probably are, definitely helps. So I would not focus on specializing on one event in high school if that were to be the plan, if you want to continue to run in college.
Cool. Very good. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, and we talk about it a lot here, students that participate in multiple sports, we encourage that, right? A lot of times people, I mean, even now, a lot of certain sports, you'll hear of gymnasts that are starting to specialize in gymnastics starting in first grade, and that's all they'll do. But being a multi-sport athlete is really setting you up to be successful, not only as an athlete, but later on in your life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree. Like I mentioned, so just for some background, I played 2 years of basketball. I played freshman basketball, and then I played varsity as a sophomore, and I played 3 years of high school football. And then I obviously did the 4 years of track. And that really wasn't by, intention. I loved football. Basketball is actually my favorite sport. I love both football and basketball. It was kind of hard to stop playing, but it got to the point where once I did, sign a letter of intent to a school, there was, it wasn't forced, but there's suggestions, hey, or like, what's the plan for you moving forward, football and basketball? Just because, it gets to be a point where trying to prevent injuries and whatnot, make sure you're healthy, when you do arrive to campus, when you start college. But I would definitely suggest anyone out there, regardless of what sport you're playing, to partake in as many sports as you can in high school, because they all lend to each other. And not only that, I mean, there could be regrets down the line and say, oh man, I should have done that extra year of basketball, or I should have tried out for the baseball team, So I really do think it's important to really, really, really emphasize the kids that being a multi-sport athlete is great, and if there's any coach that tells you otherwise, they're probably being a little selfish because they want their time all your time to them. But I think it's really good to just participate as much as you can in high school.
It does seem that there's more injuries. Like my daughter was in track, and I think that it seems there are more injuries when they specialize sometimes, Like I know with basketball and stuff with other sports, there's a lot of. What are you laughing at, Soap?
I'm looking at Ed.
I make people laugh. My face makes people laugh. I don't know what to tell you.
I know about that, but no. But I mean, track is probably the biggest example, I think, of where if you specialize too soon, you're really more likely to get hurt.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could just come upon repeat stress factors. You're working the same muscle groups, the same same parts of your body nonstop year round for years on end. Regardless how well you take care of yourself, you're probably bound to have an injury. I went through one injury late in high school, and then a handful of injuries late in college. You work to a different level when you get to the college level, and injuries they're not imminent, they're not guaranteed, but they're going to be more likely because you're practicing more and you're doing the same thing, pretty much year round for 4 years. You might get a break here and there for a week, but even when you're out of season, you're still practicing on your own, working on your own. So yeah, I think the single sport could possibly lend to certain injuries and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I want to apologize for the Sullys, which, just so you know, they're related.
We caused this.
No, I get it.
Looking at me.
I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at everyone.
No.
Are you guys in the same room? Are you not social distancing?
No.
What's going on?
No, we are.
No, we're not at the same location. We don't live
So
with
he's
each other.
Thank God. You'd corrupt Red.
I would. There's no doubt about that. Well, this is, we're going to be wrapping things up here. So if there's anyone else that is in the chat room that would like to add anything, any questions for Matt, Brendan, or Sophie? Brendan, Sophie, do you guys have any questions for Matt, being that he's a former D1 athlete? I know you guys have some college aspirations.
I have a quick question.
What's up?
Was the University of Illinois, was that like your only school you were looking at? Or were there other schools that were like recruiting you? Like, how was that process for track? Because I know it's different from other sports.
Yeah, that's a good question. So you probably know you're allowed to take 5 official visits as a high school athlete. And by official visits, that means, when you go out to the school, they essentially pay for everything. They'll put you and your family up in a hotel, or they'll pay for your transportation there. Obviously everything's comped when you're there. You can take as many unofficial visits as you want, but once you go somewhere and they pay for anything, or you go to any team sponsored event, not team sponsored event, but once they start paying for stuff, it's official. So I took advantage. I took all 5. Other schools I was looking at, Notre Dame. I visited Central Michigan University, visited Iowa. I had interest from schools on the East and West Coast, but I just wasn't too comfortable going that far from home. So most of my visits were from the Midwest. But Sophie, you're a sophomore.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably already both. You're probably already getting college interest with how you guys did this past playoff season. But your junior year will start ramping up a lot, and you'll start going on some visits. But you're allowed 5, and I think that's plenty to get kind of a good feel. Get a little small school, find some bigger schools. You can do check out schools in different regions, see what you like best, different conferences. So definitely take advantage if you have the opportunity to use all 5 of your official visits, and even if it means going to a school a second time for unofficial visit, and that's totally okay. I took an official visit to U of I, and then I went back a second time with my mom, just for an unofficial visit. Checked in with the coaches, saw the practice. But obviously at that point, you're not paying for any of your stuff, or there's no nice dinners out with the team or anything like that. So, but definitely take advantage of all of it. And if you have any questions further beyond, me and Ed could talk and we could discuss, me and you.
Okay, thanks.
Brendan, how about you? Do you have any questions for Bernsey?
How did you get noticed by college scouts?
Me personally, Ed mentioned earlier, I ran a real good race. I got lucky. I ran a real good race at the right time of the year when I was a junior.
It was not lucky. It was not lucky.
It was a rainy day. It was a horrible storm, and I was a lot of the guys didn't quite run to their up to par what they're usually doing, and I kind of just ran the course par what I kind of usually run, and that allowed me to do pretty good in the state meet. And from then on, I started getting a lot of contact from coaches. But that is not to say that the only way to it is for coaches to email you, coaches to mail you, or coaches to come to your house. There's nothing wrong with as a college athlete sending your information out to a coach, because there's thousands and thousands of kids playing high school sports. So there's no way a coach is going to be able to turn over every stone, and get a look on every single kid. So there's nothing wrong at all. Track is really easy because it's an objective sport. You jump a certain height, you jump a certain distance, you run a certain time, or you throw a certain distance. So there's really no film involved, that you could just send your times. But there's nothing wrong with sending your film to a college, and saying, hey, my name's Brendan. I'm a sophomore at St. Francis, or I'm a junior at St. Francis. This is my film. I'm interested in competing at the college level, and see what they think. There's no harm in it. There's no way they're going to be rude to you. The worst they say is, we're not interested. You don't get a response. So there might be coaches that come and visit you or email you, or ask you to come see them. And then on the contrary, you might reach out to coaches, and that could be the spark. Then all of a sudden, oh, wow, we like this kid. He's got the potential and whatnot. So it goes both ways. It's not just coaches reaching out to you. It's you reaching out to coaches as well.
Matt, what about, I have a thought on that. So since you took advantage of the 5 visits, and did you get some visits at home, first of all, and stuff like that?
Yeah. It really depends on the school. Because it starts to get almost political when you get to the college level. It's coaches have limited amount of time, and they're, for track and field, they're recruiting. Well, they sign maybe 15 kids to the team each year, but they might be recruiting 45. So there might be a little bit of a pecking order. You know, you might not be number one on their list, so they might not make an in-home visit to you and come sit in your living room with you, but they might invite you to come down to the school. But then for another school that might be smaller, you know, you might be higher on their priority list. So I had one coach come, you know, coaches come in and meet at my house with me, and then others, you know, I just met them at the school. So it really just depends on, you know, it sounds weird, but you know, what school want, how much they want you in comparison to other student athletes and whatnot.
One other thing I think would be a good question for Brendan and Sophie to hear is, what would you know, when you're interacting with 5 schools, are there any things to help you sniff out what a coach maybe doesn't have the best intentions for you, or isn't a good fit, or whatever it may be, just kind of a vibe that you get from each of those? Yeah.
I had, not going to name schools, but I had some experiences with coaches that weren't ideal, you know, and the fit just wasn't right. His philosophy personally, and you know, the best is just to be straightforward, and you don't ignore them, you don't lead them on, because they have a job to do. They got to go find other, you know, student athletes and stuff. It's the best to just be straightforward. I don't think it's a good fit, but as far as actually feeling them out, the best way to do it is really to go to the student athletes. I mean, a coach could sit in front of you and tell you everything in the world, but at the end of the day, what they say isn't the same thing as what they do. So I found it best to go, you know, when I was on visits, make sure I'm asking student athletes, hey, you know, how's the coach like, or what's the team atmosphere like? And it also is helpful. This is a big thing I'll say, is finding the student athletes that aren't necessarily, you know, the All-Americans, or, you know, the team captain or the top dog, because obviously those people might be getting a little bit different treatment than the guy that's at the bottom, the guy or girl that's at the bottom of the totem pole. So I think it's really important to get the opinion of the student athletes, specifically, you know, the student athletes that might not be getting all the preferential treatment that a coach or, you know, a college might be giving them. So I think it's really, really good. Don't be afraid to reach out to the athletes of the team and ask questions, because that's where you're going to get the truth from, and that's where you're going to get, you know, your good resources.
That's cool. Good
Bernsey, I got a question for you. Considering that, Brendan, how far did your basketball team make it this year? Did they make it to the sectional final?
Sectional semifinals.
Sectional semifinal. Nice. Sophie's team made it to the state semifinals. Now, I went to a high school where, unfortunately, we didn't really make the playoffs, and that's okay. But considering we have 2 young individuals here who's individually, as with their teammates, are trying to win a state championship. Matt, when you competed in that race, and I remember where I was in my living room that day watching you live. And Sophie, do you remember me going nuts when he competed in that race?
No.
I was going nuts in my living room.
He wasn't going nuts, Matt. He's just saying that.
No, I was.
I'm just
I mean, I was.
I believe you.
Bernsey, when you cross that finish line and recognize that you are the state champion, you are the best in the state at what you do, what goes through your mind? What emotions come to you?
Yeah, I mean, it was 7 years ago, so it's hard to recollect. But at the end of it, it was a big moment for me. I definitely there's a feeling of just the accumulation of all of the work that you put forward, and it's every little, like I mentioned earlier, every little thing you do, you know, it could be the difference between inches or, you know, or seconds. But, you know, it was kind of like a rush of emotions. You know, you don't really necessarily you don't have enough time to think. You know, I was throwing up after the race. I was, you know, so worked. So it was hard, you know, in the moment it wasn't as much, but a little bit time went by, and after, when you can gather it, it's really just that accumulation of hard work, and you're so grateful to your coaches, and me particularly, my teammates that were able to push me. I mean, the last couple weeks of the season I was by myself, but I had teammates whose seasons were over. They didn't care. They came to practice every day and ran with me, because they knew that, you know, I shouldn't be running alone, and they would split up reps so they could run, you know, they could whoop me around in practice. You know, I'd run against kid A, I'd run against kid B, I'd run against kid C. They're all whooping me, and they showed up. So I was really grateful to my coaches and them, because, you know, I know track's an individual sport, but, you know, at the end of the day, you're scoring points for a team, and, you know, and you gotta represent your school and represent your team.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, being the athletic director of your grade school, I know I never had you as an athlete, but, you know, for me, you know, reflecting on that moment, you know, the weather conditions that day were not ideal, right?
Yeah.
And we know that where we practice track at, we practice out in the parking lot in the field, right? Not ideal, right?
It's the humble beginnings. It builds character running out on an asphalt parking lot.
Right. So it's having those things kind of against you. The fact that you had two excellent coaches in grade school, your father and your mother, who are just hardworking, wonderful people. Like seeing that all build to that moment for you, I loved every second of it. Yeah,
I did too.
For you and your family, it was magnificent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So it looks like we don't have any questions. Steve Riley wanted me to mention Steve Hands. Once again, when Murph and I get overly animated during games, watch out. Murph, you have some love as well. Joe Hayes says, that. Murph.
What's up, Joe?
So, Matt, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say, I didn't talk much about the high school, but for kids going from grade school to high school, it does get more serious. It gets more important. You might have coaches being more vocal. But at the end of the day, high school sports is still supposed to be a lot of fun. So don't let that change. I mean, it's going to be more competitive, but it's not all of a sudden high school and it's your job and it's your livelihood. It's still supposed to be fun. And if that's one thing I could say about high school sports is make sure you're enjoying it, because high school is a lot of fun and college is still fun, but it gets way more serious. The jump is vast. It's big from grade school to high school, but make sure you're still having fun. And
the jump is also big if you're doing vertical or horizontal jumps as well. Hey,
that's right.
Hey.
That's right. That's right.
Sorry, I had to get that in.
I know Sophie's not laughing at that.
I thought it was a good joke.
No,
Brendan,
it wasn't.
Brendan, how about you? Any final thoughts?
Some advice for basketball tryouts is work hard, play defense, and don't try and do anything special. Just stay solid, and because the people who get cut are usually people who try and do all these fancy moves and step back threes. So I just say keep it simple during tryouts.
Did you hear that, Sully? The step back three.
That's your favorite thing. I actually, guys, it's such a good joke on here. We actually have something. Oh, I lost it. I have a banner on here. Here it is. Murph loves the 3-point shot. Absolutely loves it.
Do you know when I only love it? I haven't seen Brendan play as much. When Sophie shoots it. Other than that, I don't like it. No. It has its place, and it has more of a place these days.
That's right.
That's for sure.
That's right. Sophie, do you have anything to close up here?
I would say not just for basketball, but any sport you do, to stay the course and stay focused and not let other people get in your way of achieving your dreams or having you have fun.
That's wonderful. So, Murph, we're here to wrap things up here. How about you tell the audience about our next episode, since you came up with the topic?
Oh, are we doing the movies, right? That's what we're doing, right?
Yes, we're doing. Yes.
All right, I just want to make sure.
Yes.
We the guys say yeah, but you never know. We got some special guests. We got a couple of guys that we coached with, 3 guys that we coached with, John, Jeff, and Josh. We've been already talking and rehashing some movies, and of course, putting them into the youth athletics catalog, and then the other ones that are not necessarily appropriate, that's out of here. But the sports movies that inspired us, Sully and I are big Rocky fans, to say the least. We always quote it, but there's just a lot of great fun movies out there. So that is our next topic. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, for all the people listening at home watching this, if I get one more shirtless Murphy training montage video to my phone this week, I'm just going to lose my mind. There's only so much. There's only so much of Murph sending me hearts on fire that I can handle.
Sophie, that's not true. Just so you know.
I don't know.
I do a lot of things to keep the athletes having fun, like Matt said, because that is absolutely the most important. But there are limits, Sully.
I'm just kidding. Murph did not do it shirtless, but he was trying to be like, you know what? I think I should do a training video on my bike. And I'm like, well, let's be careful here now. We do not have insurance on this podcast.
Yeah.
Yep. But for Brendan Yarusso, Sophie Sullivan, Matt Burns, Murph, I'm Sully. Thank you for joining Murph and Sully's Youth Athletics Podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Good job.